The night of the charity gala was supposed to be perfect. Every corner of the tall glass building shined under warm golden lights, and the guests walked in dressed in suits and gowns that looked like they belonged on magazine covers. People whispered about the man who made the event possible, the billionaire CEO known simply as Adrian. He had built companies, funded hospitals, and pushed himself harder than anyone around him. But none of the guests knew that he had been hiding a deep exhaustion for months. Lena, a young waitress working her third job of the week, stood near the back of the room with a tray of sparkling water. She didn't fit in with the noise, the fashion, or the pride that floated around the hall. She had come to the city only a year ago, hoping for a better life, and this job was one of the few steady things she had. She wore a simple black uniform that was slightly too big on her, and her shoes pinched her feet, but she kept a soft smile on her face. People rarely noticed her, but she was used to that. At the center of the hall, near a tall bouquet of white flowers, Adrian stood surrounded by reporters. He looked perfectly calm, but Lena noticed something strange about him. His face had a slight pale tone, the kind that didn't come from the lights but from someone fighting something inside. She had seen that look before, but the memory of where and when it happened felt too painful to visit. The guests clapped as Adrian raised his glass to start the evening's speech. Cameras flashed, capturing every second. He smiled politely, but his hand trembled for a brief moment. No one noticed except Lena. She watched him closely, unsure why she felt uneasy. Adrian took a breath, opened his mouth to speak, and then paused. It was a tiny pause, hardly noticeable, but his eyes flickered with a strange panic. He tried again to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. His fingers loosened around the glass. A single drop of champagne slid down the side and hit the floor just before the whole glass slipped from his hand and shattered. The hall fell silent. At first, people thought it was a joke. Some expected him to laugh, pick up another glass and keep going. But instead, Adrian staggered backward. His breathing became uneven, sharp, and fast. He pressed a hand against his chest as if something inside him had suddenly locked. Someone screamed. Others rushed backward to stay out of the way. The reporters lowered their cameras, unsure whether to step forward or stay back. The security team ran in immediately, surrounding Adrian as his body jerked, almost like he was fighting to stay standing. Lena froze. She had seen this before. A long time ago, back home, when her mother had helped people who arrived at their door in the middle of the night with strange episodes of breath loss and shock. She remembered her mother's calm voice, her hands moving quickly, and how people said she had saved lives no doctor could reach in time. Lena's heart started to pound. She took a small step forward without even realizing it. The guests crowded around, talking over each other, blocking the air with their panic. Adrian couldn't speak, couldn't stand. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. The sound of his fall rang through the entire hall. Glasses clinked and rolled from nearby tables. A woman attempted to reach out to him, but a security guard stopped her. "Call the medics now," another guard shouted, already speaking into his radio. Lena felt her hands shaking. A voice inside her whispered that she shouldn't interfere, that she was just a waitress, that security would escort her out if she got too close. But another part of her, an instinct, something older than her fears, pushed her to pay attention to Adrian's movements. His breathing was shallow and fast, like he was slipping into something deeper and more dangerous. The doors burst open, and paramedics rushed in with equipment. They kneeled beside him, checking his pulse, attaching sensors, and trying to stabilize him. But their expressions shifted quickly from confidence to concern. One medic whispered to another, shaking his head. "It didn't look good." "He's not responding," one of them said. "Pulse is dropping." Lena felt her stomach twist. She stepped forward again, but a guest bumped into her, pushing her back. She looked around at the frightened faces in the crowd. People who had come dressed like royalty now stood helpless, unsure how to save the man whose success filled their magazine pages and investment accounts. Adrian's eyes fluttered weakly. His face turned pale, almost gray. His body trembled as if fighting a cold that came from inside, not outside. "Is he going to make it?" someone whispered. Someone do something. Why isn't this working? The medics tried another method, adjusting his position, checking his response. But it wasn't working. His condition seemed to worsen with each breath. Lena swallowed hard. Her hands were sweating around the empty tray she still held. The memory of her mother kneeling beside a man who had suffered a shock from a fall drifted into her mind. Her mother's hands had moved with certainty, applying gentle but quick pressure to certain points on the man's neck, chest, and wrists until he calmed down. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was knowledge, old, passed down, rarely talked about outside their village. Lena didn't know if the same technique would help here. She didn't even know the exact nature of Adrian's condition. But her heart told her something important. The man was slipping away, and the methods being used on him weren't helping. The crowd was starting to panic loudly now, adding pressure to the medics who were already losing control of the situation. Security kept pushing people back, but even they looked worried, unsure if they should keep the crowd away or ask for more help. A woman in a formal silver dress stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke to the chief medic. Is he going to be okay? Please tell me he will. The medic did not answer right away. He looked at Adrian, then at the equipment, then at the numbers dropping on the device they had attached to him. His silence was enough to make everyone in the room understand the seriousness of the moment. Lena took a deep breath. She placed her tray gently on a table so it wouldn't make noise. Her feet felt heavy, but something inside her told her she couldn't just stand there and watch. She moved toward the front again, pushing through small gaps between the guests. When she reached the front of the crowd, a guard extended his arm to stop her. You need to step back, he said firmly. I might be able to help, she whispered, her voice small but steady. The guard frowned. This is not your place. Please step back. But Lena didn't look away. Her eyes were glued to Adrian, whose breathing had become so thin it was almost invisible. Her heart ached. She didn't want to disobey the rules, but how could she walk away when someone was dying? I'm not asking to replace anyone, she said quietly, but I've seen this before. My mother helped people who had attacks like this. Please, let me try. The guard hesitated, but before he could answer, one of the medics looked up. He was tired, frustrated, and afraid they were losing the patient in front of all these witnesses. Whatever she thinks she can do, it won't help, he said sharply. Lena lowered her eyes for a moment. She wasn't angry. She understood why he dismissed her. She was just a waitress in an oversized uniform, standing in a room full of people with more education, more power, and more confidence than she ever had. But the truth didn't disappear just because someone refused to see it. The medic attempted another adjustment on Adrian's position, but the device beeped with a warning. The numbers dropped again. A soft cry escaped from someone near the front. Lena's breath caught in her chest. She couldn't watch this anymore. Her mother had taught her that if someone's life was slipping away and you had the ability to help, even if you weren't sure it would work, you didn't remain silent. She stepped forward again, this time more firmly, and spoke in a voice she didn't recognize as her own. It was stronger, clearer, and filled with something like determination, though it trembled at the edges. Please, she said, looking at both the medic and the guard. He doesn't have much time. I think I know what's happening. I can help stabilize him. Just give me a chance. The hall went silent, as if everyone held their breath at her words. The medic stared at her, torn between disbelief and desperation. He didn't want to risk anything, but he also saw that nothing they were doing was working. Before he could respond, the woman in the silver dress, who had been watching everything, turned to look at Lena with wide, tearful eyes. Her voice shook as she asked, "What can you do? How do you know?" Lena swallowed, feeling the weight of the entire room press down on her. My mother used techniques that helped people survive shock episodes like this. I learned them when I was younger. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen this before. The woman glanced at Adrian. His breathing had nearly stopped. Let her try, she said softly, and in that moment, everything changed. For a moment, no one moved. The medic still hovered over Adrian, torn between their training and the desperate situation before them. Guests stood in a tight circle, frozen in fear. Even the music that had been softly playing earlier had stopped, leaving the room filled with nothing but the sound of Adrian's weak, uneven breaths. The woman in the silver dress, whose hands were shaking too much to keep still, looked directly at the chief medic. "Please," she said again. "Let her try. You said he has almost no time." The medic closed his eyes briefly, like he was wrestling with the decision. Then he stepped back and nodded at Lena. "Fine, but be careful. If anything goes wrong, we stop you immediately." Lena nodded, but inside she felt like her heart was about to burst through her chest. She stepped toward Adrian with her palms sweating and her breath shaking, but every step reminded her of the nights she had watched her mother work. She remembered the quiet confidence her mother carried, even when everyone else around her was terrified. But Lena was not her mother. She knelt beside Adrian as the crowd stepped back slightly, clearing space for her. His face was pale, and his eyelashes barely twitched. The device the medics had placed beside him showed numbers that were dropping toward danger. For a moment, Lena felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. She worried that if she made even one wrong move, she would make everything worse. But then she remembered her mother's words, the ones she heard countless times as a girl. When someone is fighting for their life, fear cannot lead you. You must listen. Not with your ears, but with your hands. Her hands trembled as she reached for Adrian's wrist, but the moment her fingertips touched his skin, something familiar returned. An instinct, the same one she had tried to ignore for years. She felt the weak pulse beneath her touch, skipping in an irregular rhythm. Her mother had taught her that certain shock responses could be slowed by pressing exact points along the wrist and neck, points that helped regulate the flow of oxygen and calm the nervous system. It was not something modern hospitals relied on, but in the small village where she grew up, these responses had saved lives when medical help was miles away. She placed her fingers gently on Adrian's wrist and applied a slow, steady pressure. She counted silently, letting her breathing match the rhythm she wanted his to follow. Then she used her other hand to press lightly behind his ear near a nerve cluster her mother had shown her. The crowd watched with silent confusion. The medics exchanged glances, as if they weren't sure whether to be impressed or worried. Adrian's pulse stuttered once, then again. "Come on," she whispered, not loudly enough for anyone else to hear. "Stay with me." For a moment nothing happened, and panic crawled up her throat. But then, slowly, his pulse steadied. Not strong yet, but no longer falling as fast. She kept her hands in place, focusing on every tiny shift she felt beneath her fingers. The medic leaned in slightly, his expression changing. "His pulse is stabilizing," he said in disbelief. The woman in silver covered her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. Lena continued her work, gently adjusting the angle of Adrian's head and applying another small pressure point her mother had taught her. She didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't look at the crowd. Her world narrowed to only the man lying in front of her and the knowledge she carried from her mother. After nearly a minute, Adrian's breathing became slightly deeper. Not steady, but better. The machine beside him beeped in a softer tone, showing a faint improvement. The medic confirmed it again. "His oxygen level is rising very slowly, but it is." Lena let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She moved her hand to a point on the side of Adrian's neck, where she gently pressed and massaged in a slow, repeated motion, something that helped relax the muscles around the airway and reduce shock tension. Her mother had explained how certain techniques signaled the nervous system to calm down, allowing the body to respond instead of shutting down. Adrian's eyelids flickered, very slightly, but enough that Lena noticed. The woman in silver stepped closer. "He moved. I saw him move." Lena nodded softly. "He's still here." Those words gave hope to everyone watching, even if the fear in the room had not fully gone away. But as Lena continued working, memories of her mother filled her mind. She remembered sitting beside her as a child, watching her treat people who had traveled far to see her. She remembered how gentle her mother's hands had been, how her voice created calm in even the worst situations. People trusted her mother because she didn't see them as patients. She saw them as people, scared and hoping for help. And now here Lena was, kneeling beside a man worth billions, using the same knowledge she once thought had no place in a modern city. Her chest tightened at the thought of her mother. She wished she could hear her voice now, guiding her. But she had to rely on what was already inside her. The teachings she had held close and the memory of the people her mother had saved. Slowly, she moved her fingers in a small circular motion along a nerve point in Adrian's wrist. She felt tiny twitches beneath her touch, signs of returning stability. His breathing deepened again, and his chest rose more evenly. The medic lifted his eyes in disbelief. His heart rate is stabilizing. Whatever she's doing, it's working. One of the other medics whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Not from pride but from fear that she was still not doing enough. She checked Adrian's neck pulse again. It was still weak but more regular now. She kept focusing, applying precise motions her mother had drilled into her hands years ago. Then, something unexpected happened. Adrian's hand twitched. It was small, barely there, but enough to draw gasps from the crowd. "He moved," someone said softly. Lena leaned closer. "Adrian, can you hear me?" she whispered, her voice calm and warm, the way her mother had spoken to her patients. "You're safe. Keep breathing." For a second, she thought he might respond. His eyebrows tightened slightly, and his chest rose with a deeper inhale. But he didn't wake, not yet. Still, the signs were enough to show that he was pulling away from the edge. The machine's numbers climbed again, slowly, but undeniably. The medic looked at the guests. "He's coming back. He's not out of danger, but he's responding." Relief washed through the room like a wave. Guests exhaled loudly, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The woman in silver stepped back and pressed her hand against her heart, her shoulders shaking with soft sobs. Lena continued working, but her arms were beginning to ache. She had been kneeling in the same position for several minutes, using careful precision that required both focus and strength. But she didn't let herself stop. Not until she was sure he was no longer slipping away. One of the medics crouched beside her. His voice had lost its earlier sharpness. "You said your mother taught you this?" "Yes," Lena answered without taking her eyes off Adrian. "She helped people who had shock episodes. We lived in a town far from hospitals." He watched her hands for a moment. "It's remarkable. Most people would freeze in a moment like this." "I almost did," Lena whispered. "But he needed help." The medic nodded slowly, almost respectfully. Another minute passed, and Adrian let out a slow exhale, longer and fuller than before. His body relaxed slightly, as if he was drifting into a safer state. Lena felt his pulse once more. It was still not strong, but no longer collapsing. She finally lifted her hands, letting the medics move closer again. "He's stabilized enough for us to take over," the chief medic said gently. "You did more than we ever expected." Lena moved back but stayed close, her heart pounding with relief and exhaustion. She watched as the medics adjusted equipment and prepared to move Adrian to a stretcher. She let out a long, shaky breath. The tension in her body finally loosened, and a strange mix of relief and disbelief washed through her. She had actually helped him. She had actually pulled him back from the edge. But before she could step fully away, the woman in silver approached her. Her eyes were red from crying, but they held a soft, grateful warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved him. We all saw it." Lena opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She simply lowered her eyes and nodded. The woman placed a hand gently on her arm. "Whoever taught you, they must be proud." A lump formed in Lena's throat. She nodded again, unable to speak. As she stepped back, the crowd parted silently around her. Not ignoring her this time, but watching her with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and disbelief. For the first time since she arrived in the city, Lena didn't feel invisible. But she also didn't feel relieved. She knew something important had just begun. Something she couldn't yet understand. The moment Adrian was lifted onto the stretcher, the atmosphere in the hall shifted again. The panic had eased, but it was replaced with a heavy, quiet tension. People spoke in whispers now, almost afraid to break the fragile calm that settled over the room. The medics worked quickly, checking Adrian's vitals as they prepared him for transport to the nearest hospital. Lena stood to the side, her knees still weak from kneeling so long. She didn't know what to do with her hands, so she kept them clasped together. She felt strangely small despite what she had just done. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming wave of emotions that hit her all at once. Relief, exhaustion, confusion. It all blended together inside her. She took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. Someone approached her from behind. A gentle voice said, "You should sit down." Lena turned to see one of the event organizers, a man with a soft expression and a slight bend in his shoulders as if the stress of the night had pressed down on him. He gestured toward a nearby chair. "You've been through a lot. Please," he insisted. Lena nodded and lowered herself onto the chair. Her legs welcomed the break. She watched as the medics rolled Adrian toward the elevator that would take them to the ground floor. The woman in silver followed closely behind, not taking her eyes off him for even a second. The doors closed, and for the first time since the collapse, the hall felt strangely empty. People began to move again, but slowly, as if waking up from a long dream. Some whispered to each other, glancing at Lena with expressions that ranged from curiosity to admiration. A few guests gave her small nods of respect. Others looked at her with wide eyes, still trying to understand what they had witnessed. The guard who had stopped her earlier walked over. He seemed unsure how to begin. "I didn't expect that," he admitted quietly. "You did something incredible." She shook her head. "I just helped. The medics did the real work." He lowered his voice even more. "No, they weren't saving him. You were." Lena didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded and looked away. Eventually, the event organizers announced that the gala was ending early. Most of the guests left quickly, eager to return home after such a terrifying experience. Some of them approached Lena before leaving, offering soft words like, "Thank you," or "You were brave." A few simply touched her arm gently and walked away. But Lena didn't feel brave. She only felt overwhelmed. After the hall finally emptied, she collected herself and headed toward the staff area to clock out. The manager, a tired-looking woman with sharp eyes, met her at the door. "You did something important tonight," the manager said softly. Lena didn't know whether she was being praised or questioned. "I just did what I knew," the manager sighed. "The news will explode with this story tomorrow. Be prepared for attention. I'm not sure if it will be good or bad, but it will come." Tension. The word made Lena's stomach twist. She had never wanted attention. She had always preferred quiet moments, small tasks, and staying in the background. She felt safe there. The manager patted her shoulder. "Go home and rest. You look like you're about to faint." Lena nodded. She gathered her bag and walked out of the building into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered around her, and cars rushed by on the busy streets, unaware of the life-or-death moment that had just unfolded inside the tall tower. She took the subway home, choosing a seat in the corner. Everyone around her was lost in their own world, talking to each other or watching videos on their phones. No one knew who she was or what she had done. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by strangers, she finally allowed her shoulders to drop. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the rhythm of the moving train calm her racing thoughts. When she reached her small apartment, a tiny place with peeling paint and a window that rattled when the wind blew, she took off her shoes and sat on the edge of her bed. Her mind replayed the night in pieces. The moment Adrian fell, the fear in the crowd, the medic's hopeless expression, the warmth of Adrian's pulse slowly returning under her fingertips. Her mother's voice echoed softly in her memory. "Your hands hold more than strength. They hold understanding. Use it when the world needs it." Lena closed her eyes and felt tears gather, not from sadness, but from a deep ache of missing the woman who had taught her so much. She whispered. I hope I didn't mess it up, Mama. The room remained silent, but the comfort of the memory wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She finally lay down, exhausted, and drifted into sleep. Morning arrived faster than she expected. A loud, sharp knocking at her door startled her awake. She rubbed her eyes, confused. It was too early for visitors, and she didn't know anyone in the building who came by without notice. She opened the door slowly. Outside stood two people wearing formal clothing and carrying small identification badges. One was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. The other was a calm-looking man holding a notebook. Are you Lena? The woman asked. Yes, Lena said quietly, holding the door only halfway open. We're from the news station nearby. We heard about what happened last night. We wanted to ask you some questions. Lena's breath caught in her throat. No, I can't. The woman raised her hands gently. We understand you're overwhelmed. We just want to hear your side of the story. I don't want attention, Lena said, shaking her head. The man spoke this time. You saved the life of a very important figure. People want to know who you are. I'm just a waitress, she whispered. The woman smiled softly. Not anymore. Lena's heart pounded. She didn't want cameras. She didn't want to be on the news. She didn't want strangers knowing her name or her face. She had left her old life behind to avoid attention, and now the world seemed determined to find her. I'm sorry, she said. I can't speak right now. She closed the door gently, but firmly, and leaned her forehead against it. The knocking did not return. After a moment, she heard their footsteps fade down the hallway. Lena sank to the floor. She wrapped her arms around her knees and tried to breathe slowly. This wasn't what she wanted. She had helped someone, yes, but she didn't mean to step into the spotlight. She only did what her mother had taught her. Her phone buzzed on the table. When she picked it up, she saw dozens of notifications. Messages from her coworkers, missed calls, and links to articles with headlines like, Unknown waitress revives CEO at charity gala. Who is the young woman behind the miracle? Experts react to unusual life-saving technique. Lena felt dizzy. People online were already discussing her, judging her, praising her, guessing things about her life. She dropped the phone on the bed and took a deep breath. Everything was spinning out of control. Later that afternoon, she returned to work, even though her manager had told her she could take the day off. She needed routine. She needed to feel normal again. But the moment she walked into the restaurant, all eyes turned to her. Her coworkers rushed toward her, each one speaking faster than the last. Is it true you saved him? What did you do exactly? Are you going to be on TV? Did the company call you? Did his family call you? Lena kept her head down. I don't know anything yet. I just want to do my shift. They exchanged glances but stepped aside. During the lunch rush, she kept herself busy. She took orders, refilled glasses, cleared tables. Anything to keep her mind from drifting back to the night before. But even the customers recognized her. A few whispered her name. Some asked politely if she was the girl from the news. Others stared openly. Lena felt uncomfortable the entire time. She just wanted to work in peace. Near closing time, as she wiped down a table, the front door opened quietly. She didn't look up at first, thinking it was another late customer. But when she turned, she froze. Standing in the doorway was the woman in the silver dress. Only now, her formal gown was replaced with simple clothes, and her expression was gentler, no longer filled with fear. She walked toward Lena with soft, careful steps. Can we talk? She asked, her voice steady but emotional. I think you deserve to know what happened, and why we need to speak to you. Lena swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand. Something in the woman's eyes told her this conversation would change everything. And even though she wasn't ready, she nodded. When he finally opened his eyes again, the room felt different. The heavy panic that once floated in the air was gone, replaced by a quiet warmth. The man lying on the hospital bed blinked slowly, his gaze drifting from the ceiling to the window, then to the machines around him. His face looked less tense, less pale, and there was a calmness in his breathing that hadn't been there earlier. It almost felt like his body had been fighting for hours and suddenly decided it could rest. But even then, he wasn't sure where he was or what had happened. His mind moved slowly, like pieces of memory were scattered all around him and he was trying to gather them one by one. The only thing he could remember clearly was collapsing before reaching his car, and a voice calling out to him. Steady, firm, but filled with worry. He couldn't see the face back then, but he remembered the voice. It echoed inside him even now. On the chair beside the bed, the waitress, the same young woman who had been the only one bold enough to run toward him when everyone else stepped back, was sitting quietly with her hands folded. She wasn't sure if she should stay or leave. Nurses had told her she could wait until he woke up, but she didn't know whether she really belonged there. Still, a part of her felt responsible. She had been there when it happened. She had done whatever she could, and somehow he had survived. When the billionaire CEO finally turned his head to the side and their eyes met, she almost jumped. His gaze wasn't strong, but it was searching, confused, curious, soft enough that it didn't feel intimidating. He tried to speak, but no words came out at first. His throat felt dry. She quickly poured a little water into a small cup, held it carefully, and helped him drink. The moment the water touched his lips, he let out a small sigh, as if the simple act of swallowing had brought him a step closer to reality. "You're awake," she whispered, almost afraid she was disturbing something fragile. He blinked slowly, lifted his hand weakly, and pointed toward her chest pocket where her little restaurant badge still rested. His voice finally broke through, low and shaky. "Who are you?" She hesitated, unsure whether he would even remember anything from what happened. "I work at the diner on the corner," she said calmly. "I was finishing my shift when I saw you collapse. I just tried to help." His eyebrows pulled together. He took another breath, this time deeper, and stared at her as if trying to connect her face to the voice he remembered. "You helped me?" he asked again. She nodded. "You weren't breathing right. I thought you might not make it. I didn't know what else to do, so I just acted." He slowly closed his eyes for a moment, as if letting the truth sink into him. A billionaire CEO, known for being untouchable and shielded by layers of security, reduced to a helpless man on the ground, and saved by someone who didn't even know his name at first. Someone who didn't run away. Someone who didn't freeze. Someone who simply cared. When he opened his eyes again, there was a different expression on his face. Not confusion. Not fear. Something closer to gratitude, though he seemed too tired to fully show it. The door opened gently and a doctor walked in, smiling when he saw the man awake. He checked the monitors, adjusted a few wires, and gave a long exhale of relief. The waitress stood up, unsure whether she should step out. But before she moved, the doctor nodded at her. "You should stay," he said kindly. He was asking about the person who helped him before he lost consciousness. "I'm glad he got to meet you." She sat back down, feeling a strange mix of nerves and comfort. She wasn't used to this attention. She wasn't used to sitting beside someone so powerful, someone whose name she had seen in newspapers and on the news. Yet now, he looked nothing like the fierce business figure everyone knew. He looked human, vulnerable, and grateful. The doctor explained everything gently. The CEO had suffered a dangerous drop in blood pressure combined with underlying stress and a complication from a condition he hadn't been treating properly. The doctor said that the quick reaction from the waitress, the calm pressure on his chest, the way she kept him breathing, the way she called for help, played a huge part in keeping him alive long enough for treatment. Hearing that made her heart sink a bit. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She had only done what any person should do. But the doctor insisted that many people freeze, panic, or hesitate in situations like that. She didn't. After the doctor left, silence settled again. The billionaire CEO shifted his hand slightly, then extended it toward her in the slowest, most careful movement he could manage. "Thank you," he whispered. She shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're okay." He looked at her as though he didn't fully agree. To him, what she had done wasn't small at all. It wasn't something he could easily brush aside or forget. "I don't remember everything," he said, still in a weak voice. But I remember someone saying, "Stay with me, don't give up." That was you, wasn't it? She lowered her eyes, feeling the memory returning to her too. She hadn't planned those words. They just came out naturally when she saw how fast his condition was dropping. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I didn't want you to go." The room stayed filled with calm stillness. For a man who had lived a lifetime being surrounded by people who wanted something from him, money, opportunity, power, this moment felt different. This person had nothing to gain from saving him. She didn't even know who he was at first. And when she did, it didn't change how she acted. For the next few minutes, they talked slowly. He asked her what she was doing out there so late. She explained about her double shifts and how she was saving money for her younger brother. He listened, really listened, something he rarely got the chance to do with strangers. She told him she didn't think of herself as brave. She just reacted like anyone would. He disagreed quietly, saying most people don't act the way she did. But the moment that touched him most was when she confessed she wasn't sure if she had done things right, that she was afraid she might have hurt him. He gently shook his head. "You saved me," he said again, this time with more strength. "That's the only truth that matters." A soft knock sounded at the door, and 2 security guards peeked in. The CEO raised his hand weakly to stop them. "Not now," he said firmly. "I'm talking to her." They nodded and stepped back, closing the door. The waitress wasn't used to anyone shutting out people for her. She wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, and certainly not his. Her cheeks warmed a little, but she stayed composed. Something about his tone made her feel like he wasn't speaking as a billionaire. He was speaking as a man who had been given a second chance. Before she could say anything else, he reached out again, slow but determined. "I owe you my life," he said with a sincerity that made her chest tighten. "And I don't forget things like that." She smiled gently. "Just focus on getting better. That's enough for me." But he shook his head, faintly but clearly. "No," he said. "This is just the beginning." And as he looked at her with eyes that held more life than they had when he first woke, something shifted between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, just deeply human. He had been a man known for closing doors, for keeping distance, for trusting only a handful of people. Yet here he was, forming the first human connection he had allowed himself in years. The connection with the person who saved him. The morning light came slowly through the hospital blinds, spreading across the quiet room like a soft reminder that life always moves forward, no matter what happened the day before. The billionaire CEO had slept for the first time in days. Real sleep, not the restless drifting he'd been trapped in before. Now, as he opened his eyes again, he felt stronger. Not fully healed, but very much alive. The young waitress had stepped out early in the morning to let him rest. She didn't want to overstay or make him feel pressured. She wasn't used to being around people like him, and every time she walked through the hospital halls, she wondered if she should even be there. But something inside her kept telling her to come back, at least until she knew he was safely out of danger. By the time she returned, the hallway outside his room was busier than the night before. A few business partners had shown up, some looking worried, others looking impatient. A couple of reporters stood near the elevators, trying to get information. His company staff kept moving in and out, whispering updates, asking about his condition. She felt out of place immediately. People in suits stared at her badge, then at her clothes, wondering who she was and why she was there. Some looked confused, some curious. One woman even asked if she was lost. But she kept walking, her heart beating a little faster. She wasn't there for them. She was there for the man inside the room, the man she had seen lying helpless on the ground, the man she had fought to keep alive. No one could tell her that she didn't belong. When she reached the door, one of the guards gently stepped in front of her. "He's resting," the guard said. "Only essential people can enter right now." She nodded politely. "I understand. But he told me to return today. He wanted to see me when he woke up." The guard hesitated. He had been there the night before. He had heard the CEO speak to her. He knew she wasn't just another visitor. Before he could respond, A familiar voice came from inside the room, weak but clear enough to cut through the noise. "Let her in." The guard immediately stepped aside. When she entered, she saw him propped up in bed, a calm expression on his face. The stress lines on his forehead were still there, but softer now. He was dressed in clean hospital clothing, and a nurse was finishing checking his pulse. He looked at her with a kind of warmth that surprised even her. "You came back," he said slowly. She smiled. "I said I would." The nurse left, giving them privacy. He studied her gently, as if trying to understand her more, not just what she did for him, but who she was as a person. "I had a long night," he said, "thinking about everything, thinking about how close it was, thinking about you." She shifted slightly, not sure how to respond. He continued, "My doctors said if you hadn't reacted the way you did, I wouldn't have made it. They said it clearly. You didn't just help me. You kept me alive long enough to get here." She lowered her eyes, feeling shy. "I only did what anyone would do." He shook his head. "No. Many people saw me fall. You were the only one who ran toward me." The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of calm that comes when the truth has settled between two people, when words are no longer needed to prove anything. After a while he spoke again, his voice steadier. "I want to do something for you. Something meaningful. Not just a thank you card or a handshake. Something that actually matters." She shook her head quickly. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't help you for a reward." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why it matters." She paused, listening. He looked at her with an expression that held more gratitude than any fancy speech could ever carry. "Tell me what you need," he said softly. "Anything in your life that could change things for you or your family. Something you dream of, something you hope for. Let me help." She sat back, unsure. She had never been offered something like this before. It almost felt unreal. She tried to stay calm, but her heart raced at the thought. She had dreams, of course she did. But she wasn't sure if it was right to share them. She wasn't someone who took advantage of others. "I don't want to use you," she said honestly. "You're not using me," he replied firmly. "You saved my life. This is me trying to honor that." His voice carried no pressure, no demand, only sincerity. She finally took a deep breath and said, "I just want something simple. Enough stability so I can stop working double shifts. Something so my younger brother can stay in school without worrying about money. I don't need anything more than that." He listened closely, absorbing every detail. When she finished, he nodded. "Then that's exactly what I'll help with." She tried to protest again, but he stopped her gently. "This isn't charity," he said. "This is gratitude, and it's my choice." He asked for her details, her workplace, her responsibilities. He listened like someone who genuinely cared, not like a man making a business deal. A few minutes later, his company assistant knocked on the door, looking stressed. The CEO gestured for him to come in. The assistant stepped forward, holding several documents and speaking quickly about upcoming meetings, stock concerns, public statements, and investor questions. But the CEO raised his hand to stop him. "Later," he said. "Right now I'm busy." The assistant froze. It was rare, almost unheard of, for the CEO to pause work for anything. But the message was clear. At that moment, the waitress mattered more than the business world outside. After the assistant left, the billionaire leaned back slightly, still watching her. "I've lived my whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from me," he said. "Money, power, connections, something. But you didn't want any of that. You only wanted to help. And it changed everything." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Not with praise, not with respect, not with genuine appreciation. Later that afternoon, the CEO's legal team prepared an official support package for her family. Full scholarships for her brother, financial support for their home, and a job opportunity for her if she ever wanted it. All of it came without strings attached. When she saw the papers, she didn't know whether to cry or to refuse. But he gently encouraged her. "You deserve this," he said. "You gave me time I almost lost forever." She finally nodded, accepting the offer with trembling hands. But the moment didn't end there. As the evening sun lowered, the billionaire asked her the question he had been holding on to since he woke up. "Will you stay in touch?" he asked quietly. "I don't want this connection to end here." She smiled. A soft, sincere smile that felt warm enough to fill the room. "Of course," she said. "I'll stay." And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: trust. Not because she was wealthy or influential, but because she was genuine. She had seen him at his weakest, at a moment when nothing about him looked powerful. She had saved him anyway. A few days later, when he was finally discharged, she walked with him to the entrance of the hospital. They talked like old friends, not like two people who lived in different worlds. Reporters snapped photos from a distance, unaware of the story behind the simple moment. When they reached the exit, he turned to her with sincere eyes. "You didn't just save my life," he said. "You changed it." She didn't respond with big words. She simply placed a hand on his arm and said, "Take care of yourself, and remember what matters." He nodded. They parted ways, not as strangers, not as billionaire and waitress, but as two people whose lives had crossed at the exact moment they were supposed to. And while neither of them said it out loud, they both knew something quietly powerful. That night, when she ran toward him while the world stepped back, something more than a life had been saved. A human connection had been born. One that would stay with them both long after the moment had passed.